And we continue learning Dirshu Mishnah Bura. Yesterday we began Siman Kuf Ayin Ches, that which is called a hefsek and a Seudah. And yesterday we learned through the lengthy but critically important Mishnah Bura, the Hakdama. Probably it's a Hakdama that when we finish the Siman we should come back, and at that point we'll even understand it better. And from the Hakdama we must remember that which we're going to see in Siv Aleph and the beginning of Siv Beis is not going to be the full-fledged halacha, as the Ramah is going to argue in Siv Beis, and that's what even Sfardim are going to baskin like, as we saw yesterday. So says the Mechaber in Siv Aleph, now, but what's also important is that even if we're not going to baskin like the full shita of the Mechaber and Siv Aleph and Beis, but woven within, we're going to see a lot of very important details about Shinuy Makom, so we shouldn't just disregard everything that we're about to see. So says the Mechaber, one is eating in one house, Seudah, and he pauses his meal and he goes to another house. Or he's middle of eating and his friend called him to talk to him. He goes to the entrance of his house, and then he comes back. He must make a new bracha. Why? Because he was mishane mekaimai. He changed his place. Continues the Mechaber, lemafreya al masha oichel. One more time, we're in the middle of a sentence, I lost it. One more time. Now what does he have to do again? Sarich levarech limafreya. He has to make a bracha backwards, al masha ochal, on that which he ate, and then so he's finishing and then starting again. However, he talked to a friend in the house. Even if you go from one corner to the next, you do not need to make a new brach. Says the Ramah. If your das is to eat another place, then that's not called Shinuy Makom. That's if it's two places within one house, and that's the halacha the Ramah is teaching us, that Shinuy Makom, if you have das, then everything is fine. So says the Mishnah Berurah over here, Sivkatan Aleph. Says the Mishnah Berurah, we're talking about eating by yourself. Why? If you're eating with other people, on a big savior, and other people stay at the table. And that's going to be a big halacha. That anytime one has a Shinuy Makom issue, but if there's other people at the table, you do not lose your bracha. Even if you didn't wait at all, very strong words of the Mishnah Berurah. You walked outside for a moment. You go right back. Certainly, if you want to go to the second place, but the moment you walk outside, it's called the Shinuy Makom. Lebayis acher sevgaten gimel vo adin lecheder acher. Kam gimel chal Shinuy Makom lo she'edaitem et chilish anas cheder acher lamam v'ga ayin sham. Unless you have das, even going from one room to the next needs das. Your friend just wants to talk to you. As if you went from house to house. Again, even though you didn't stop your meal at all, you just went outside to talk to someone. You went outside. That's called a stoppage point. You went outside the door. If you talk at the doorway, that's not a problem. So now, this part, everyone's going to hold of what we just said. It's the next detail that the Mechaber Paskins, that you need to finish and restart, that might be a debated point. But again, the fact that it's a Shinuy Makom, that's conclusive. If you go from place A to place B, mibayis luchotz is what we'll call it. You go from your house outside, your bracha is over. Now, again, how far? What brachas? That's going to be the debated point of the Rama. He's going to say when it comes to Hamaitzi, maybe not, etc., etc. But the fact that it's called a Shinuy Makom, that's absolute. The Mishabura Baskins, you go outside for a moment, you go outside to talk to someone, even you come right back, doesn't make a difference. It's called a Shinuy Makom. The one caveat, the one savior that he's taught us so far is if you leave people at the meal. So the Machaber Paskin Sarach LavarisIvkotan Vava Idea Yitimim Kaimai, you left your place, Chashid Kenifsek Sudas Legamri, it's as if you finished your meal entirely. It's like a new meal, and therefore you got to end your first meal by making a berachas hamazon, and then start a new meal with and a hamaitzi al ha'aba, hamaitzi on that which you're going to eat. Going further, let's continue. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sivkot and Zayin that the hamaitzi, the berachas hamazon is limafreya. Says the Mishnah Berurah, in your first place. Says the Mishnah Berurah, and this lechatchila again will stand the test of time. This lechatchila will apply. That what says Mishnah Berurah? When you want to leave your place, we're going to see that always you're leaving, you should finish a meal before you leave. And then pass. Says Mishnah Berurah, that's only if you're eating bread. You lose your bracha. As we'll see in Siv Beis. And again, all these Siv Beis, this is going to be, as we're going to see, the Rama arguing at what level it's called that you lose your bracha. But the fact that it's a Shinuy Makom is for sure true. The Mechaber continued that even if you're going mipino lepino, within one room from area to area, hainu ba'isa cheder. Let's say you can't see your original place. There's a table, there's a couch, there's something in between. One place, maybe we could say you're at a chasan or a simcha, and there's a mechitza now blocking you. You can't see your original place. Because it's under one roof. Finally, come on, Sivkat and Yod says Mishmur Atzalim, the Shamayr Linin Shinuy Makom Gabi Kiddush or Dinlin Anenu. But him Hayataita is talking about Cheder Lacheder, Sivkat and Yod Alf Atzalim, Shebishas HaBrocha. High level, not when you leave, you had das to leave. Of course, you had das to leave. When you make the bracha, you have a mind to eat in the second place. Bebayis echad in one house, again, just one room to the next. Says Mishnah Berurah Sivkat in your base. Hainu tachas gagach. If you can see the original place through a window, so Mishnah Berurah over here opens up a little bit what will work. Let's say you didn't have das and you want to go room to room. Then if you could see your original place, even via a window, then that's still called you're some level connected, and it's not called a Shinuy Makom. V'dafka, but clarifies the Mishnah Berurah, mecheder lecheder ba'isai bayis. Avol mi bayis lebayis avshemuchem zelzeh. If you go from one house to the next, even right next door, mistabkon achronin davsha dein la'akal al yidei riyas makom. It might not be enough if you can see your place. V'da, and you should know. That we don't make a bracha on a Shinuy Makom. This is going to be our Rambam on Siv Beis. How we're going to paskin that bread is going to always pull you back, and if you don't make a new bracha to a nafkamina lidina kol Shinuy Makom, everything that we said is not going to have chalukim. Rak. So the Mishnah Berurah here at the end really wraps up the Sif beautifully that this whole sif is only going to have relevance, well, only, that's a large relevance, to shahakal eitzan adama. Then you'll have the Shinuy Makom. Then, if you go outside, talk to your friend for a moment, says the Mishnah Berurah, you come back in, you need a new bracha. Then you go out to get the mail, you're in the middle of your cup of coffee, you put it down, you go out to get the mail, you come back in, you need a new bracha. In all those cases, you go from cheder to cheder. You go from your dining room to the kitchen. You need das. Now, what's going to be called das? Could be nowadays we have something called stam das that we know we eat all over our house. But you need das cheder to cheder, etc. So, before we call it a day, let's see some very important Dirshus over here. Says the Dirshu number 4, that one of the big caveats that we spoke about was that if you have other people at the meal, that's going to save the day. Says the Dirshu Mesimas L'Shaina of the Mishnah Berurah Tzemashma that this does not help Ella Im Kain, only if the people that you're eating with are at still the meal. However, comes from the Ben Ish Chai and he writes, so too, if there's people there that are not eating. I mean, the Mishnah Berurah sounds like you need to have people left at the meal that you are connected with, which meant you're eating together. What if you're not eating with them, but they happen to still be in your table in your house? Mishnah Berurah would sound like it does not work. The Ben Ish Chai says it does work. So, comes on the Machzik Bracha, which is the Chida. He writes that the Marikish proves that they don't have to eat with you like the Ben Ish Chai. But, says the Machzik Bracha, he doesn't like his rayas. The Kav HaChaim brings his machlekes as well, comes along, Yochaim Sheinberg, and he says, Lamaisa, he is mekel. They don't have to be eating with you. He's mekel like the Ben Ish Chai. We continue over here, which Dirshu number 5, it discusses, what does it mean you leave someone behind? What if you leave a katan? I hope it's not a 4-year-old that you left in the home alone. But let's say you leave someone not bar mitzvah, maybe it's a 12-year-old, that you leave him at the table. Says Sheinberg, that's enough. It's as if you left someone behind. Comes along Rav Tzion Abba Shaul, Arla Tzion, and he writes, leaving a katan helps from the age in 6 and above. So that age you can be mitzvah for a Siman according to the Svardim. Therefore that will work. Again, whether one should be leaving their 6-year-old home alone, it's a different discussion, but with regard to Hilchos Brachos, says our Letzion, that will work. We continue with note number 6. Says the Dirshu, when we go from cheder to cheder, that's called Shinuy Makom unless you have das. So Dirshu points out the Ramah is going to agree with this. However, Lamaisa says the Be'er Halacha, even though it's Ra'i, it's Nachlin, it's Lachash, all the good things L'chatchila, that what we should go with the Achreinim, that one should not go in the middle of a meal from room to room, unless you had originally your das. However, says the Be'er Halacha, already Bisman Be'er Halacha, Noyig Lahakal Bazeh, you should not be Meicha, they have what to rely upon. Al Kopanim, but the Eved, Bevada, you don't have to make a new bracha, because Safek, and Safek bracha is lahakal. And over here, the Dirshu continues with the note that we were referencing, Bismanenu, people do not sit still. Ready, Bisman Rishon Zalman Arbach and Rechavia says Rishon Zalman Ein Sarich Lahakbid, not to move around while you're eating within one house. Why? Because even if it's not called mefurash, even if you didn't think about it at the time of the bracha, it's as if you thought about it. And let's just realize that this is not a maitzi. This is anything. I'm having a cup of coffee in my kitchen. I now could go to the dining room, the den, the attic, the bedroom, etc., etc. Well, Yashiv and Shvat Yitzchak says the same thing. You do not have to be makbid, not to go from room to room. And even you go to a room that you don't necessarily eat there. You go to the bathroom, and not necessarily, hopefully you don't eat there. You go to the bathroom. It's not called a Shinuy Makom. Why? Because it's all one house. All the Gedalim are coming along and saying the same thing. Going from the Makom Sheragal Adam Lachas Elav Memsa Sudasai is all fine. A woman to go to a room to nurse. All of these reasons are not called a Shinuy Makom. Chlishi Brasa explains, because it's a regilos, and therefore it's as if you had kavana. The Dirshu over here, Lamaisa points out, that comes on the Shevet HaLevi, and he says, regarding to go from the kitchen to bring in more food, Tavka Bismanom, that they would eat misubim mikameiseyem, and the shamish would serve them. Then if one of them would get up and go, then it would call the hefsek. But nowadays that we don't have a shamish, definitely not like they had bisman a chazal, ba'albayis, someone else goes to bring this stuff, then it's not called a hefsek. So all the gedalim really bepecha teaching us that lamaisa nowadays going cheder lecheder is not something that one has to be concerned with. And we continue over here, a few more Dirshus. Note number 7 says the Dirshu. And there we go. Note number 7. As we mentioned, you have a machitza in the middle of a hall, says Rav Sheinberg, even if, that is called Tashmishi Abayis, and therefore it's not going to ruin your bracha. You're all in one room. The Mishmur said at the time the bracha you have in mind to go to that area. What does it mean? Choshav lechol, says of Nitzah Karelitz, it says of Chaim Kanievsky, they're mistapek if sheyachshav lechol be'emsa achilasai, but he didn't think whether that's going to be enough. And finally, note number 10 over here is a biggie. That what is it called? It says all under one roof. What if you go out to the porch? Is the porch called one roof? Is that called cheder lecheder? Or is that called bayis lechutz? And the ramification is going to be massive. If it's called cheder lecheder, we just said that even though maybe lechatchila for sure you should be having it in mind, but b'diavad you're for sure okay. If it's called cheder lachutz, if the porch is like the street, then all bets are off. Then you lose your bracha the moment you walk outside, says the Mishnah Berurah. So a porch that's not covered, says Rav Sheinberg, says Rav Shlomo Zalman, that even if it does not have a roof, it's called part of the house. It's called cheder. The cheder, our Letzion says the same. However, on the other hand, Rav Elyashiv comes along and he says, going onto the porch, it's not covered, it's considered a Shinuy Makom, and Nitzah Karelitz has a suffix. And these have many relevance. This is in Hilchos Mezuzah has relevance, Hilchos Sukkah has relevance. Could also very well be. Well, let's first Dirshu over here before we make a comment. Hayoytzel chatzer prati she'enoi mekura, says Rav Elyashiv, says Rav Sheinberg, that's called a Shinuy Makom. That's called a Shinuy Makom. However, it comes in Rav Vosner and he says he makes a difference. A porch that's not roofed between a chutzner. Okay, this is a chutzner, not a porch. A moment ago it was a porch. So when it's a porch, we can understand it's more of a reason that it's considered part of your house. However, over here, if it's just a chutzner, your own backyard, says Rav Elyashiv Chaim Sheinberg that it is called a Shinuy Makom. However, it comes in Rav Vosner and he's machalik. A porch that's not roofed and between a chutzner is not considered by Yisacher. It's called a cheder acher b'is abayis, and therefore, of course, the Shinuy Rishos will not be. You won't lose your bracha. What about a porch which is part covered and part not covered? It says in this in Karelitz, ein alicha, going from one area to the next in the porch is not going to be called the Shinuy Makom. And finally, what if you go out to your sukkah? We're going to see in Reisha and Gimel with regard to Kiddush. You go from the sukkah to your house. That it's not considered a hefsek, and the machitza acheres. Okay, let's leave Hilchos Sukkah. The comment that we want to make about the porches is a lot of this might have to do with the practicalities, how one's porch, how one's chatzer prati is used. If your porch, and as you see a lot of the Eretz Yisrael Gedalim over here, if one's living in an apartment and the porch is literally an extension of the kitchen, and that's exactly how it's used, it's going to be very difficult to fathom why that would be called a Shinuy Makom. It's true that it's outside, but it's literally part of your house. And similarly with the backyard, if it's one goes in and out constantly, then it would seemingly be the same thing. And finally, let's finish up with Dirshu over here, note number 11. He said, the Mishnah Berurah said, he go bayis to aliyah, and then bayis to aliyah. So now, let's say the second room is someone else's. Says Shemzam with regard to Kiddush, it's considered going to another house. Even if that person gives you reshus to use that room, he's mistapik, that might be called going to another house. Elyashiv says the same, that even though they're all under one roof, this is relevant by apartment buildings, it's still called a Shinuy Makom. Similarly, Rav Vosner says the same with regarding Chadarim, Shainim, Bevayishel, Penimiyah, and Rav Sheinberg is mistapik. So all the Gedalim again, even though here it's one roof, but there's 7 owners, that's also going to be called a problem. Lamaisa Arletzion says no. Even if you go from Dira Achas, Derech Cheder Madrigot, you go via the stairwell to your friend's apartment, he says that's called a Cheder Lecheder. But we're seeing that definitely many of the Ashkenazi, if not all, are holding that once you leave your apartment to the neighbor's apartment, it's going to be a problem. And we'll point out the next note over here says that even if you're going to say going from apartment to apartment is one level, but what happens when you go to the stairwell? Says Rav Sheinberg, that's its own shayla. You could be yishla hakel, and that's called cheder, just the stairwell. Why? Because the stairwell is a public area for everyone. So I'm also part of that. So if I go from my house to the stairwell, Rav Sheinberg and Rav Nissim Karelitz don't have a problem with that. Rav Osner does, and he says it's called the Shinuy Makom, as well as Rav Yashiv and Rav Chaim Pechel Sheinberg. But if you go to the Cheder Magrigot, the stairwell, that's your area. Sometimes you're allowed to keep something right outside your door. Then Rav Yashiv says that's not called a Shinuy Makom. And we're seeing how it's getting very, very nitty gritty and complicated when you're walking out from your front door. And finally, we said that if you could see the area, then that helps. So says the Dirshu note number 12, the Shulchan Chaim says it's only a window that is near the door. Because if not, once you leave and you can't see it at that moment, then it's over. If you could see it 5 minutes later, that's not going to help you. Regarding Kiddush, the Das Torah is mistabek. If you need to see the place or not, Chai Adam is mashma, you don't actually have to. Shlomo Zalman comes along and says, if you're standing next to the window, they're able to see your original place, then that I don't know what that word is. Okay. And finally, let's say you can't see, but you can see part of the room that you're eating in, which is a very relevant case. The dining room is further into the room, so you're sitting on one end, and now you can see through the doorway, but you can't see the place that you're sitting. Still, says the Aruch HaShulchan, it's enough that you could see the room. Or Shlomo Zalman says the same. If you could see the other room that connects the two, which often will be a big savior, and we'll pick it up from Sif Beis V'siyata Dishmaya.